random philosophical fiction. He had actually befriended the aging comedian Larry Fine when they were both living out in Hollywood.
Just two guys grinding away in the industry.
Exactly. They were collaborating on a film script that, fascinatingly enough, would later become the huge blockbuster hit Nazareth. Dead or Alive.
Wait, really? The Nazareth movie?
Yep, the very same one. But then, right in the middle of all this, tragedy strikes. Larry Fine passes away.
Oh, wow.
And the very next day, literally the day after he dies, Kiashole sits down and begins writing this book.
That is just, it's a massive pivot from a Hollywood script.
It is. And he explicitly stated later that Transmigration of Larry Fine was an updated, comedic reimagining of the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Right.
He created it specifically to help his friend's soul cross over into the afterlife and beyond.
That specific framing just changes everything about how we interact with this text, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. Because the Tibetan Book of the Dead is traditionally what anthropologists call a psychopomp.
A guide for the soul.
Exactly. The ancient belief is that when you die, your consciousness enters this transitionary phase, a space between lives called a bardo.
And that bardo state can be chaotic, right? Like confusing and filled with terrifying visions.
Very terrifying. So a psychopomp is essentially a map given to the deceased so they don't get lost in the void.
So Kiashole realized his friend was venturing into this ultimate unknown, and he just decided, you know, Larry needs a map.
Right. But he also knew Larry was a comedian.
Yeah, handing a slapstick vaudevillian a dry, ancient religious scroll probably wouldn't work.
Not at all. He needed a map written in his own language. And that is exactly why the back cover classifies this book as philosophy, metaphysics, and cosmic humor.
Cosmic humor, I love that.
It's the survival guide for the afterlife, just disguised as cheap paperback pulp.
And it uses a very specific literary format to pull this off, right? The text literally calls itself a metamemoir.
Yeah, a metamemoir, which, for anyone listening who might be unfamiliar, a metamemoir doesn't just tell a story. It is hyper-aware that it is a book.
It's self-aware.
Very. It aggressively blurs the lines between the author's tangible reality and just total fabricated absurdity.
Which forces the reader to constantly question what is real and what's a construct.
Exactly. Which is exactly the skill a soul would need to navigate a chaotic afterlife.
That is so clever. And honestly, imagine you're holding this book in your hands. You haven't even turned to page 1 yet. And the visual presentation is already doing the work of a psychopomp.
It disorients you immediately.
It really does. It disorients you, and then it basically hands you a mirror. We have to talk about this front cover art because it is a deeply unsettling masterpiece.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Smack in the center of the cover is Larry Fine's face, but it's violently split right down the middle by this glowing, crackling bolt of yellow lightning.
It's this literal fracture of identity, a perfect visual representation of a mind split into two entirely different realities.
Yeah, and on the left side of that lightning bolt, Larry's face is warm, it's full of rich color, and his skull is physically peeled back.
Right, but you don't see a brain.
No. Inside his head, you don't see biology at all. You see this vibrant, cosmic, almost utopian landscape. There are these majestic mountains reaching up, a glowing sunset, winding water.
It's beautiful.
It's this infinite, serene world just existing inside his mind.
And that left side represents the metaphysics part of the puzzle. It's the infinite, boundless potential of human consciousness.
The fact that we can even imagine that stuff.
Exactly. The fact that a mortal human can conceptualize eternity, that we can visualize galaxies or imagine entire utopian worlds that do not physically exist anywhere, that is the cosmic landscape we all carry inside us.
But then your eye drifts across that lightning bolt to the right side of his face, and the contrast gives you absolute whiplash.
It's grim.
It is entirely in grayscale. Every ounce of color is just sucked out. Larry's eye on the side is drooping heavily. He looks incredibly weary, just exhausted by the sheer physical weight of existing.
And the skull on that side.
Yeah, his open skull on this right side is not a cosmic landscape. It's just a hollow cavity filled to the absolute brim with crumpled up pieces of paper.
Just trash.
Just trash, discarded drafts.
What the artist has done here is perfectly capture the inescapable duality of the human condition.
Right.
We have these infinite godlike minds on the left side, but we are trapped in the decaying, exhausted bodies of the right side.
Bodies that have to pay taxes and sleep.
Bodies that experience pain. We constantly try to express the profound truths of our left hemisphere, but the physical translation always fails. And that results in nothing but the crumpled, discarded drafts filling the right hemisphere.
You know, I look at that crumpled paper, And it immediately triggers that universal experience of falling asleep.
Oh, how so?
You know when you're drifting off and suddenly your brain just fires on all cylinders? You have this massive universe-altering epiphany.
Oh, sure. You figure it all out.
You understand the very fabric of reality, the meaning of life, how to solve every problem you've ever had. You lie there thinking, I am an absolute genius.
And then the warning comes.
Right. You wake up the next morning, grab a pen to write it down, and all your physical body can articulate is like, frogs are pretty cool.
Exactly. Your brain generated a 5-dimensional masterpiece, and your physical hand could only output a crayon drawing.
It's so frustrating.
But that gap, that horrifying, frustrating limitation of being physical, is exactly what the right side of this book cover represents. It's the tragedy of having an infinite mind tethered to a finite reality.
Which raises the ultimate question, doesn't it? How does a book, especially a disposable piece of pulp fiction, actually bridge that gap?
Right.
How does Kiashole take us from our grandest, most untouchable cosmic thoughts to our most mundane, frustrating realities without the reader just, giving up?
Well, he bridges that gap by just refusing to treat the cosmic and the mundane as separate entities. He forces them into a high-speed collision.
Yeah, if we look at the text on the back cover, it poses this one central, staggering question. It says, what if you weren't just you, but everything, everywhere, every when?
Every when.
Yeah.
That phrasing is so deliberate.
It is. He isn't just talking about being connected to everything right now. He's talking about experiencing the entirety of time simultaneously.
Right.
The text describes Larry as a, quote, human organism and reluctant cosmic traveler, unquote, who is slipping through the folds of existence.
Slipping through the folds.
Yeah. Kiashole is sending his deceased friend on this journey from ancient civilizations to distant galaxies, spanning from the literal birth of thought all the way to the heat death of the universe.
And we should really pause on that concept for a second. The heat death of the universe.
It's heavy.
It is the ultimate endpoint in thermodynamics. It's the theoretical moment when all usable energy in the universe is just exhausted. Stars burn out. Galaxies go dark.
Everything reaches absolute zero.
Everything reaches absolute zero, and all physical movement, all warmth, all life permanently ceases to exist.
And the text describes this journey as hilarious, horrifying, and profoundly human.
Horrifying seems right.
I feel like horrifying is the most honest word there, because if you truly sit down and try to conceptualize the heat death of the universe, the absolute final extinguishing of all light and meaning, and the idea that your consciousness might be present for it.
It's paralyzing.
It is paralyzing. That is existential dread in its purest form.
But what's fascinating here is the specific vehicle the author chose to navigate that terror.
The vaudevillian.
Exactly. He didn't choose a stoic philosopher. He didn't choose a hardened warrior or a detached scientist. He chose a comedian whose entire career was based on physical slapstick.
Right.
Existential dread usually demands a serious dramatic response. Contemplating the void usually leads to nihilism. But projecting that exact same dread onto a vaudevillian framework changes the entire chemical makeup of the philosophy.
See, I want to push back on this a little bit, or at least challenge the core premise here.
Okay, go for it.
When you are faced with the literal end of all matter, the absolute void, is comedy actually a logical coping mechanism? Are we really meant to accept that a well-timed joke is the highest form of philosophy?
It does feel a bit flippant.
It feels almost dismissive of the gravity of existence.
It sounds reductive, right?
Yeah.
But think about the mechanical architecture of a joke versus the mechanics of existential dread.
Okay.
Dread paralyzes you because it demands a serious answer to an infinite, unanswerable question.
Right.
A joke, however, survives the infinite by pointing out how absurd it is that we're even asking the question in the first place. A joke relies entirely on setup and subversion. And what is a greater subversion of expectations than the human condition itself?
We're pretty weird creatures.
We are sentient meat, capable of understanding our own cosmic insignificance that is inherently ridiculous.
So instead of fighting the dread, you just point at it and laugh at the sheer scale of the mismatch. We're just specks of dust stressing out over a cosmic timeline we can't even control.
Precisely. By making a dense, terrifying subject feel like a funhouse mirror rather than an academic lecture, Kiashole is arguing that a laugh is perhaps the only honest, rational response to the void.
That makes a lot of sense.
The traditional Tibetan Book of the Dead tells you how to navigate the afterlife with serene, detached meditation. Kiashole's version suggests you might just slip on a cosmic banana peel while doing it.
The cosmic banana peel.
And that slipping is part of the Enlightenment.
That is brilliant. It forces you to realize that taking the universe too seriously might actually be the ultimate trap. It keeps you stuck in the bardo.
Exactly.
Now, it is very easy for us to sit here decades later and embrace this chaotic slapstick philosophy. But how does this concept of vaudeville versus the void actually hold up when tested against some of the most rigid, highly educated minds of the 20th century?
That is the true litmus test.
Yeah.
And that brings us right back to the back cover's endorsements.
The blurbs.
The blurbs, the people praising this book, represent an impossible assembly of minds. As we noted, they could not be more ideologically opposed to one another if they tried.
The blurbs on this back cover are jaw-dropping. I'm going to read them one by one because we need to really dissect how this book broke through their individual armors.
Do it.
First up, we have Noam Chomsky, the father of modern linguistics. An incredibly influential, deeply serious, left-wing intellectual and political theorist. Chomsky writes, quote, "A profound and unsettling work that forces us to reconsider the nature of self, reality, and the very essence of being. Kiashole has done something truly dangerous. He's made philosophy funny and funnier. He's made it real," unquote.
Notice his specific use of the word dangerous. We have to think about who is speaking here.
Right. Chomsky doesn't use words lightly.
For someone like Chomsky, who has spent his entire life dissecting complex power structures, deep syntax, and institutional control, true philosophy usually requires rigorous, highly structured dismantling of ideas.
It requires academic armor. You usually need a PhD to even participate in the conversation.
Right. So to bypass all of that institutional gatekeeping with a joke, to take the most profound questions of reality and make them instantly accessible to anyone holding a $4 paperback at a gas station.
It changes the game entirely.
It strips power away from the elite academic institutions. It democratizes enlightenment. To a structuralist like Chomsky, that disruption is genuinely dangerous.
It sneaks the medicine into the candy. But if Chomsky saw it as a brilliant tool to dismantle academic gatekeeping, how does a rigid institutionalist react to the exact same text?
It's the perfect counterpoint.
Right below Chomsky, we have an endorsement from the complete opposite end of the ideological spectrum. We have William F. Buckley, Jr., the staunch, unyielding icon of American conservatism.
And his blurb is incredible.
It really is. Buckley calls it, quote, "a lunatic tour de force. Kiashole has managed to combine metaphysical speculation with vaudeville genius in a way that is as entertaining as it is infuriating."
And then the kicker.
And then he drops this incredible line. He says, "I disagree with almost everything in this book, and therefore, I thoroughly enjoyed it."
This raises such an important question about the nature of intellectual engagement. You have Chomsky and Buckley, two men who fundamentally disagreed on almost every aspect of economics, governance, and how society should function.
Yeah, and to be clear, we are not taking sides on their politics here. We're just looking at the source material.
Of course. But the point is, this book managed to transcend their intense ideological divide. It forced both of them to look at a comedian's face split by lightning and concede that it accurately captured the human experience.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. I cannot stop thinking about Buckley's phrasing. I disagree with almost everything, and therefore I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
When was the last time you heard anyone express that sentiment?
In our current media landscape, it is an incredibly rare perspective.
It really is. It says so much about modern reading habits and how we consume information. Today, we're entirely conditioned to seek out echo chambers.
Right, confirmation bias.
We actively hunt for media that validates our pre-existing worldviews. We want to read things that make us nod along and feel smart. But here is a book about comedic metaphysics that compels a highly rigid thinker to actively delight in being infuriated.
He relished having his worldview dismantled.
Exactly. What is the mechanism there? What does it take for a bizarre metamemoir to make someone enjoy being proven wrong?
Honestly, it takes an overwhelming dose of humility. And that is exactly what the sheer cosmic scale of this book enforces.
The scale puts everything in perspective.
When the narrative forces you to experience a journey from the birth of thought to the ultimate heat-death of the universe, your personal political dogmas suddenly look infinitesimally small.
Yeah.
You realize that your absolute, unyielding certainties are just more crumpled paper on the right side of the skull. It forces a surrender.
You can't argue tax policy when the stars are burning out.
Precisely.
Which perfectly sets up the third and final blurb. Because we've explored the left-wing intellectual, we've explored the right-wing conservative icon. Now we bring in the hard empirical sciences, the physical reality of the universe.
The astronaut.
The final endorsement is from Harrison Schmitt. He is a geologist and, crucially, an Apollo 17 astronaut. The man literally walked on the moon.
A literal space traveler.
Schmidt writes, quote, "As a geologist, astronaut, and student of our place in the universe, I found this book to be a wild, thought-provoking ride. It's not often a work of metaphysics reminds us to keep our sense of wonder and our sense of humor," unquote.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about the unique perspective Schmidt brings to this analysis. He hasn't just philosophized about the void, he has physically experienced it.
Right, he was out there.
He has sat in a metal tin surrounded by the infinite vacuum of space. He has looked back at the Earth and seen the cosmic landscape of the left hemisphere in real empirical life.
And despite possessing all that hard scientific data, he still appreciates the vaudeville.
He embraces the joke.
The guy who mathematically calculated orbital mechanics and studied lunar geology is enthusiastically endorsing a book where a slapstick comedian slips through the folds of existence.
Because Schmidt fundamentally understands that empirical data and scientific measurement can only take humanity so far.
Science has limits when it comes to the human soul.
Exactly. You can measure the distance between stars, you can calculate the eventual heat death of the universe, but eventually, human consciousness demands meaning. We need to know how to feel about those facts.
Yeah.
And sometimes, meaning is found not in a mathematical equation, but in a shared sense of wonder and absurdity. The fact that Kiashole wrote this not as a sterile philosophical thesis, but as a deeply personal psychopomp to guide his friend Larry into the great unknown, gives it an emotional resonance. And that resonance clearly bypassed the usual defenses of linguists, political pundits, and astronauts alike.
So what does this all mean? Why does a fake-out pulp novel from TETRAGRAMMATRON Press matter to you, listening to this deep dive right now?
It's the big so what.
Exactly. I think the Transmigration of Larry Fine serves as the ultimate everyday reality check. It is a tangible reminder that human existence is this wild, volatile, exhausting mix of profound cosmic wonder and absolute vaudevillian absurdity. We are all bouncing back and forth between the two halves of that cover art every single day.
We're constantly oscillating between the infinite potential of our minds and the mundane reality of our bodies.
Exactly. So the next time you feel completely overwhelmed, when your inbox is flooded with urgent emails, when your car breaks down in the rain, when you say the absolute wrong thing in a meeting, and you are lying in bed agonizing over it, I want you to picture Larry Fine's split brain.
It's a great mental image.
Ask yourself, are the daily stresses that are entirely consuming you right now really the end of the world? Or are they just crumpled paper? Are they just the discarded, frustrating drafts of a mind that is actually capable of exploring a grand, infinite cosmic landscape?
It is such a vital perspective shift, and honestly, it leaves us with one final provocative thought to consider. Well, we live in an era defined by deep, seemingly intractable divisions. We argue endlessly over the right way to live, the right way to govern, the right way to define reality.
I really do.
But if a bizarre $4 metamemoir about a slapstick comedian slipping through the folds of existence can unite a radical linguist like Noam Chomsky, a staunch conservative like William F. Buckley Jr., and a geologist who literally walked on the moon, all in a state of shared amusement and wonder.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps the key to solving our deepest human divisions isn't forcing agreements on rigid policy or philosophy. Perhaps the key is simply finding common ground in our shared, absurd confusion about what it actually means to exist.